Welcome back to the KDPG Sunday edition. Our guests this morning, two esteemed figures in the world of forensic pathology, both known far and wide. Dr. Cyril Wecht, of course, very well known to everyone in Western Pennsylvania, former Allegheny County coroner. His Institute of Forensic Science at Duquesne University hosted a conference featuring the man to Dr. Wecht's left. Left. Dr. Michael Baden, former medical examiner for New York City, and became a household name during the O.J. Simpson trial 2 decades ago. So, Dr. Wecht, again, looking back, we're just to finish up on the O.J. Simpson case, looking back at the verdict 20 years later, how it was perceived in the African-American community and the white community very differently, but what lessons do you think were learned from that verdict?
Well, we've already covered
so many people.
Yeah, we've already covered the matter of investigation and what forensic scientists and coroner medical examiners' offices should do, what detectives should do, reporting a case right away and not delaying it, as they did, by the way, also in JonBenet Ramsey. Not to digress, but there again, the passage of time was a key element in it. When did the little girl die? Okay, so back to O.J. So you've got that. Then you've got the collection of evidence at the scene, and then you got the following through of what you do have. There were drops of blood that had dropped in perpendicular fashion. We can tell from blood spatter expertise in a perpendicular fashion onto her back, and never tested. If it's O.J.'s blood, that's the end of the case. If it's not O.J.'s blood, whose blood, they never tested that blood. And let me remind you that the preliminary hearing was so bad by the pathologist who did the autopsy that when Lakshmanan, the chief medical examiner, came to testify in the trial, not the guy who did the autopsy, and Lakshmanan, I don't even think saw the bodies of these two people, did not do the autopsies. They started off by acknowledging, I think, 33 mistakes, misstatements that had been made in the preliminary trial. They acknowledged that because they knew that the defense was waiting to dissect them on that. And then continuing on the jury and the result, you've got that. The jury came to understand about Mark Fuhrman, and that was highlighted by Lee Bailey's incredible cross-examination, and he is the best, no question. Everybody acknowledges that. And so, Detective Fuhrman, you've telling the jury you've never used the N-word, and so on. That was extremely important. The scientific presentation, and of course, excellent attorneys. And it's interesting too. You know, we talk in America, everybody's entitled to justice and so on, and nobody gets ever excited or disturbed. I've never seen any kind of comment or heard any kind of a comment when the prosecution brings in top experts like Michael Baden. And others. That's okay. And Michael had been an expert in other cases in LA, as had Dr. Henry Lee. But when you become an expert for the defense and money is being paid and the dream team, oh my God, you know, that's, how dare a defendant spend millions of dollars to defend himself? That's, you know, so it's very interesting how that attitude. And the jury,
has that changed over the years?
Yeah.
Have Americans become more used to that, and it's not such a big deal anymore? It's not questioned the way it might have been 20 years ago?
Well, my take is that while things have a long way to go, look what's going on now with LeBron James and so on, a long way to go when it comes to racial bias in this country. But in terms of 1995 to 2017, 22 years, I think we have gone a long way yet to go. But I think that the degree of prejudice would have lessened somewhat. But the matter of the composition of the jury is important, as we are now faced with the Cosby trial.
Yeah.
Selecting a jury in Allegheny County, 20% I think African Americans compared to 55% African Americans in Philadelphia. Is he going to get the same kind of fairness of trial that he would have gotten if the jury had been selected in Philadelphia?
What's your view on that? What's your view on that, Dr. Wecht?
Well, they made a decision which I think was silly, if I may use that word. You fellas know more than I in the news media business what you think, but I believe that the Cosby case is not one of those cases, well, gee, if we move out of Philadelphia, they won't know as much about it in East Podunkville or West Overshoe or little old Pittsburgh. What difference does it make in the Cosby matter because you moved it to Pittsburgh from Philadelphia in terms of, how people
Well,
feel?
Pittsburgh is the Paris of America, as you know now.
You're saying they might as well have just picked the jury in Philly?
Yeah, yes, that's what I'm saying.
But they would have a much different pool, wouldn't they, Dr.
Yeah,
Weck?
and that's the point that I'm making, a much different pool. Well, then you get to the question of whether or not you would expect any kind of bias from African Americans on the jury. I think that there's much less bias, as I have experienced and I'm aware of, in cases with African Americans on the jury involving African American defendants than there is turning the coin over of bias by whites against a black defendant. In other words, African Americans, I'm not saying they're free of all bias, I wouldn't say that at all, but are less likely to be influenced in favor of a black defendant just because the defendant is of their race than are whites to be influenced in a negative fashion by the fact that the defendant is black. And just look, not to digress, at all of the cases that occur involving the deaths of victims, 90% of them being minorities, and in our community, blacks, and in most communities, blacks. Somewhere else might be Hispanics or so on, and white cops who are responsible for those deaths. Add those up and see how many of those cases, sometimes they do get convicted. Look at how many of those cases ever result in a conviction of a white cop.
Well, that makes me think back to the O.J. case. Do you think that for whatever role it played, the distrust of the police on the part of the O.J. jury, can you draw a line from that?
Yeah, no, I think your question goes to my thinking more so in this matter. The bias, I think, in O.J. and in New York City, when we have blacks on juries and whites on juries, often is to the credibility of police officers. That is, black people who have had bad run-ins with police, who they feel were acting improperly, tend to be more skeptical in adopting what the police testimony is, whereas white people who feel that the police are there to protect them tend to be more find police officers credible.
Yeah.
And I think this comes up with certainly with the death of black people in alterations with the police, not only from shooting but also from restraining them. They can't breathe. That we have that.
Positional restraints.
The restraints that cause death more commonly than the shootings, and that the black people can be more skeptical of police, white or black police testimony than a white person who's had good relations with the police.
All right, this is terribly unfair to bring up with only a few minutes left, but later this year, Dr. Weck, as I'm sure you know, there is a scheduled release of more documents in the JFK investigation. You two disagree on this. You believe that Oswald acted alone that day, regardless of what the background may be. And Dr. Weck, you've never believed in the magic bullet. Can you talk him out of this? Can you? Okay. Can you deconspiracy?
Michael, no. You go ahead.
I'll go ahead.
You've got the burden as a prosecution beyond a reasonable doubt. Proceed.
No, what I'll say to answer your question, Cyril and I, though opposite, agree about 95% of it. Mm-hmm. We both agree that Oswald bullets struck, the bullets recovered struck.
And you agree with that, Dr. Weck?
Well, I don't know what he means by Oswald's bullet. There's some question about the bullet and the rifle matching it up.
We both agree. No, okay, I'm sorry.
Okay.
We both agree that Oswald died of gunshot wounds.
Kennedy died, yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes, Oswald did.
I get turmoiled with the boss over. Am I right?
Understood.
No, that
we all do.
And we both agree that the autopsy done on the president was poorly done.
Okay.
And that raises a lot of the issues that can lead to two different interpretations. That the person who did the autopsy were not properly qualified to do the autopsy of the President of the United States.
Okay.
And that we agree on. And that leads to a lot of the different interpretations we might have of the gunshot wounds, et cetera, because of the way the autopsy was done and what wasn't done and what was done improperly.
But you worked for the government panel that essentially confirmed the Warren Commission,
I
correct?
was hired by the, retained by the government to look into it, and my findings and opinions would be independent of what.
You believe the Warren Commission got it right?
I believe that to the extent that it was that that the president died of 2 gunshot wounds, and only 2 gunshot wounds that struck him in the back, and from where Oswald was perched.
Okay, Dr. White, do you believe there was a second gunman?
Yes, I do. Very quickly, by the way, so people know, in 1992, the United States Congress passed the JFK Records Release Act, calling for the release of all withheld documents in 25 years. That's October of this year.
That's what I was talking about,
So
yes.
we're going to see what comes out. And I'm heading up a national organization, Citizens Against Political Assassinations, CAPA, which is going to be following this very, very closely. We've already had one conference in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club, and we're going to be doing a lot of other things. The question that you've raised, just very, very quickly, I believe that there were 2 shooters. I don't have a burden of disproving that Oswald was one of them. I personally don't believe he was, but that's okay. You want Oswald as a shooter, I say to my audiences, fine. I just want the second shooter, because now we've got, under the federal laws and the laws of every state, conspiracy by definition. Now the door is open, and that is the problem you see that they had, and that is why they had to come up with the single bullet theory to account for how 7 wounds were produced by 1 bullet. I do disagree with my learned colleague and dear friend Michael on the head wound. I think the president was struck twice. We have photographic evidence which has been analyzed now, and more to come on that this year, with showing that the president was indeed struck by 2. And in that regard, look for the movie, The Parkland Doctors, going to be released, and it has the 7 doctors who treated the president in the emergency room.
At Parkland.
No agenda, you know. I mean, they're just dealing with a guy. Happens to be the president, could have been you or me.
And
they describe wounds in the back of the head. And
Thank
the
you.
2 incompetent guys that night described everything's intact.
Got to run. Never easy to wrap up a conversation. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll take a break, be back with final thought in just a moment.